everybody, I'm Maureen, and today I'm going to be sharing with you how to make McCall's pattern 8635. It is this unisex bomber jacket pattern. We're going to be sewing up view A, so go ahead, cut out your pattern, grab your sewing tools, and let's get started. All right, on pattern piece number 1, go ahead and stay stitch your neckline and then transfer your markings for your pocket piece. This is going to be a welt pocket with a flap, and so you can also stitch around the markings if you feel like it. Let's put this to the side, and now we're going to work on our welt piece and then our flap. So with your welt piece, pattern piece number 2, fold this wrong sides together, pin at the sides, and we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew it at 3/8. With the flap piece, pattern piece number 3, pin it around all sides, and we're going to sew this down at 5/8 at our machine. Be sure to trim the sides of the welt piece and the flap piece down to 1/4 inch. Alright, so I went ahead and I trimmed all of the sides down, and we're going to turn this right side out. Then you're going to give this a really good press. Then you're going to grab the paper pattern piece and trace the marking for your buttonhole. And you'll take this to your machine, and using your buttonhole settings, you're going to place a buttonhole there, and you're also going to baste the top. On the outside of your jacket, pin the welt to the front on the bottom line, and you are going to pin this along the marking that you placed on the front of your jacket, making sure that the seam line of the welt matches up with the marking that you placed on the front of your jacket. And you're going to stitch this down between the small dots. At your machine, while you are sewing through all thicknesses, gently remove the pins and use the stitch line on your welt piece as a guide for you. On the outside, we're going to repeat these same steps, except we're going to do this with the flap this time. So using that basting stitch on the top flap as your guide, pin the flap to the line that we transferred earlier, and we are going to take this to our machine and sew it down in the same fashion. Again, sewing through all thicknesses, starting at the beginning of the flap and backstitching forward and backwards. Gently remove those pins. I will remind you that you may have to widen your stitch length for all of these steps because you are sewing through all of your thicknesses, and depending on your fabric, whether it's wool or denim, that could vary in the pile that you may have. Moving on to pattern piece number 5, go ahead and transfer that line marking onto the fabric, and then once again, just like how we did the welt and the flap, you are going to pin this in place using the lines to guide you. Sewing between the two dots, stitch along this line, making sure again that you are sewing through all thicknesses, carefully removing those pins in place and making sure that everything is lined up underneath once you are finished. Go ahead and trim those seam allowances for the pocket lining, and then we're going to move on to pattern piece number 4, which is going to be the actual pocket. We are going to place pattern piece number 4 right on top of the flap, just like how we did pattern piece number 5. And you notice here that I transferred those markings, and you're also going to see that there's a natural curvature to the pocket. So go ahead and pin that down, and then just like how we've done before, stitch this down carefully, removing those pins as you go and making sure that every piece is still lined up underneath that pocket. On pattern piece number 4, make sure to trim that seam allowance once you're finished. And now we're going to slice open the opening for our pocket piece. And you're going to follow that line that we made earlier in the middle. And then I like to use embroidery scissors to get right in those corners to make the triangles. Now we're going to pull our pocket pieces all the way through. And you're going to make sure that the welt piece is tucked behind the front of the jacket as well, and that the flap stays in the front. You're going to have to press this down immensely. I highly recommend using a tailor's clapper and steam, depending on your fabric, for the best results. All right, so this part is almost over. We're going to match up our notches, and catching those triangular ends, we are going to stitch this pocket closed. Be sure to repeat these steps for both sides of your jacket. Once again, we want to make sure that those triangular pieces are stitched down, so stitching forwards and backwards over that area. Go ahead and begin sewing down that pocket, and then making sure that you're pivoting at the corners and then going all the way around the pocket to ensure that it is closed. Once your pockets are done, reinforce the lower edge of the front at the small dot, and you'll stitch along a seam line for about 1 inch, and then you'll clip to the dot. Okay, stay stitch the neck edge of the back pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 6. And then you're going to stitch this at the shoulder seam and the side seam, putting right sides together for your jacket pieces. Once you are done stitching these down, press these at your iron, and then we're going to move on to our sleeve pieces. Okay, so this jacket has a 2-piece sleeve. So we're going to take pattern piece number 7 and pattern piece number 8, and matching up the notches and the edges, we're going to pin this in place and then stitch this down at 5/8 at our machine. After stitching down the seams, press them open and then do 2 rows of basting stitches on top of the sleeve head. Okay, now we're going to move on to pattern piece number 9, which is our sleeve band. So putting right sides together at the short end, matching up those notches, we are going to stitch this down at our machine. I recommend switching over to a zigzag stitch for this because it is knit. Once you are done sewing this down, go ahead and open up that tube, press the seams flat, and then fold it in half with the seams open, just like this, and you'll actually see a cuff start to take shape. You'll press this at your iron, and then you're going to grab your main sleeve piece, and matching up the notches, you are going to pin this right sides together. Now you're going to feel some resistance, obviously, because it is a knit band up against a woven, but the resistance is good. You want to make sure it has good snapback, and you're going to want to pin this in place with wonder clips or pins. That way everything stays in place as you are sewing. So I would use your arm on your sewing machine to kind of help guide this, and it's also going to help stretch out the fabric just a bit, to help make sure that you don't have any bunching or you don't have any gatherings where they don't need to be. So using a 5/8 seam allowance, go ahead and stitch all the way around. I kept my machine on a zigzag stitch, which I recommend, but if you want to go back to a straight stitch, I think that's fine too. Once you are done, pull this out from underneath the presser foot, and then you'll see that the cuff actually is starting to look like a real bomber jacket sleeve. So at our cutting table now, we are going to attach the sleeve to the main part of the jacket. So going through the armhole, making sure that your notches match up and your seam lines match up, gently pull that basting stitch. That way you are easing in the sleeve cap and then making sure that everything is still lined up. Once you do that, go ahead and pin this in place and take this at your machine and sew it at 5/8. And we'll do this for both sides of our jacket. After you complete this step, press your sleeve cap and then give it a top stitch from dot to dot. Okay, now we're going to move on to our knit collar. This will be the same fabric we used for our sleeve band. This is pattern piece number 11. And you'll notice that I did chalk markings for all of the dots, and I transferred all of my notches as well. So folding this in half, we are going to do a basting stitch for this. I'm going to use a zigzag basting stitch to keep this in place. Then I am going to place this along the neck edge of my jacket. Depending on your fabric, you may have to clip in extra notches. I did not have to do that for mine. And basically matching up those dots to the seam lines, you'll pin this in place. I definitely like to use wonder clips for this because if you flip it around, you start to see like, oh, it is going to look like a collar. All right, y'all. So take this at your machine and starting at the center back, stitch this down at 5/8. I did switch back over to a zigzag stitch for this, and you are going to stitch it down one side, making sure that the dots and notches are still lining up as you stitch it down, and then you will turn your jacket over and stitch it down the other side. Alright, so let's grab your zipper. I've already stitched down one side of the zipper, but make sure you separate it or that you have a separating zipper. You're going to put your zipper tape at the very top edge of your collar, and it should bump directly next to the collar band. There should be no spaces. And then you're going to pin this all the way down. I do want to emphasize that the teeth should be facing outward, because when you actually stitch it down and you're done, the teeth will be facing inward. Using a zipper foot at your machine, stitch this all the way down. Once you are done, test out your zipper. This is exactly what it should look like. Make sure that your edges all match up. You don't want anything to be uneven or off track. Now we're going to move on to our lining pieces. Okay, so take pattern piece number 12, which is your front facing, and pattern piece number 13, which is your front lining, and place them right sides together, matching up the curves and the notches throughout. And you're going to have a significant amount of space at the bottom of pattern piece number 12. This is totally normal. This will match exactly how your jacket front is. And stitch this down at 5/8 at your machine. Once you're done with the front pieces, go ahead and attach the sides and the shoulder seams as well, leaving a small opening for the lining piece, and then also attach your sleeves just like how we did with the outer jacket pieces. And you'll notice that I did leave about a 6-inch opening on the side there for future use when I need to turn the jacket right side out. Okay, we're going to get ready to sew our band. So open up your lining piece and let's go straight to this corner here. And you're going to grab your jacket as well, and we're going to place it right sides together. On that lower edge, we are going to place a pin there, and we are going to stitch it in place. If you have the zipper pull in the way, just glide it up. That way it's out of the way and you're not trying to stitch over that later. So do this on both sides, and then take this to your machine and stitch it down. You may have to use your zipper foot for this if this is a narrow seam allowance. Okay, so now we have a rectangle, and if you've never sewn a bomber jacket before, you might be like, what is happening? What did I do? Don't worry, this is completely normal. So in this rectangle place, we are going to put our lower band here. And I transferred all of the markings with tailor's chalk, and I'm pinning along the sides and on the long areas, matching up notches and dots along the way. So go ahead and do this, and we are going to get ready to sew up our band. This is like the most fun part of sewing a bomber jacket. At our machines, we are going to sew this down at 5/8 and backstitch at the beginning and at the end. You may use a zigzag stitch for this, or you may use a straight stitch. I have found either one to be stabilizing. On the long ends of the band, you will find yourself having to gently pull the fabric to make sure that it is pretty much staying in place with the notches and dots. This is completely normal. You don't want to overstretch it, but you want to make sure that you are feeling that same resistance that you had when you were sewing on your sleeve bands. Once you are done, this is exactly what it should look like. You can give this a good press. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold up your lining piece onto the outer piece and place this right sides together. You'll notice that the collar and the zipper or center fronts will automatically match up. So you're in a really good place at this point and you are almost done with your jacket. Now we're going to attach the lining to the outer piece. So make sure you tuck in all of the sleeve or all of the zipper teeth, excuse me. Make sure you tuck in your knit collar band and also tuck in the sleeves as well. And we are going to pin all the way down the center front, around the neck edge and down the other center front. And we're going to take this to our machine and sew up the lining piece. Back at our machines, starting at the center back and using a 5/8 seam allowance, go ahead and stitch down your neck edge. Once you're done stitching down your neck edge on both sides of the neckband, go ahead and switch to your zipper foot and then you will stitch down the center front using your zipper foot. I found this to be extremely helpful as to avoid sewing over any zipper teeth. Once you're done sewing this down, give this a good press and turn your jacket right side out. And you're going to do top stitching along the collar, the center front, and then along the lower band. I highly recommend widening your stitch length because you'll be sewing through all thicknesses. All right, so now we are going to work on our sleeve lining. It should look just like this one. We are going to turn up our sleeve band almost like it's an ankle sock. And then we are going to go through our sleeve lining and catch the lining and the sleeve and pull it all the way through. As you're pulling it through, make sure you are pinching the edges of the sleeves to make sure that the seams line up properly. And then you're going to pin this in place and we are going to sew all the way around that seam allowance. I used the stitch line from the band as my guide to sew all the way around this. After completing this step, pull your sleeve right side out and it should look like a completed sleeve lining. And then you're going to stitch up the lining on the side of your jacket and you'll be all set. And this is what your jacket should look like at the end. I want to thank you so much for watching that video. Now, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see y'all next time. Happy sewing!